So Saifa Wall is an intersex activist, researcher, and somatic practitioner. Saifa's committed to healing for the sake of freedom and for ancestral legacy. Hermon Getachew is a daughter, sister, friend, learner, medicine person, and a keeper of stories. Welcome to the two of you, and thank you so much for being here. I'm already so excited. I'm so excited and enriched by having met you. So welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having us and offering up space and coordinating everything. Appreciate it.
Yeah. I just wanted to open up and say, introduce myself. My name is Sean Saifa Wall. I'm going to make an ask for everyone who's in the room. If you can put your cameras on, because I think, I know people are zoomed out. I know it's COVID. It's like, another Zoom call. Oh, nah, I'll just be vacuuming my living room. But this is not this type of session. It's going to be kind of like a celebration of sorts. We're gonna go into some deep waters. And my dog is in the background. Just to let everyone know, his name is Justice. Hermon actually named him. And yeah, I've shared my story a lot, being intersex and really fighting for justice, fighting for just dignity, right? Just because of the way intersex people are treated by the medical establishment, because we're born with bodies that are different, that are atypical. We're subject to medical interventions that are harmful, and they exist in a culture of silence and shame and stigma. And so for years, since 2004, I have shared my story time and time again, right? And I had an interview with a journalist recently, and they asked, what is the emotional toll of this activism? And that was the first time, I've done a number of interviews, and that was the first time someone had actually asked me, what has been the toll of this activism? And it's a question that I'm still sitting with months later. And so, even though I will continue to fight for the dignity and sovereignty of intersex people, I also struggle and strive to stay connected to my heart, to those I love, because, it's about the fight, but it's also about love, and it's about the relationships that sustain us. And Hermon is like, a lifelong relationship. Hermon was one of the first people I talked to about my transition from being assigned female to male. Hermon is the first person who is not intersex who said that, maybe you should not use conditions to refer to intersex, right? Hermon has held so much of my story, so many tears. And I wanted to bring her into this conversation today because I want to be in this deep well with Hermon, who is like my sister, my family, my friend. And so I'm really honored that, she accepted my invitation to hold the space and to hold the collective space. Because she's a magical being. So thank you, Hermon. And I'll turn it over to you, friend.
So yeah, thank you for that. And you actually answered my first question, which is why it was important for you to be here and to share your story. I am not an extroverted person, so I just want to name the fact that I come into this space and I did some work to ground myself this morning, for sure. But I feel so grateful to have been invited by you, Saifa, because as you know, I think you are the person that I know that does human rights work with most authenticity and humility. I don't know anyone else who consistently does the gritty work on a day-to-day, and it's purely about life, and ending suffering, and it's just about that. So I'm so thankful to be your friend, to be your comrade, to be your colleague, for sure. I want to take a minute and just kind of invite everyone to ground into the space for a second. So I don't know if this is your morning, your afternoon, your evening. If it's your morning, welcome to your day. If it's your afternoon, thank you for sharing it with us. If it's your evening, thank you for letting us wind down together. Sit comfortably, stand comfortably, lay comfortably wherever you are. And just take a minute and breathe. Keep your eyes open, keep your eyes soft and easy. Soften into your breath. Take a minute and feel your length. Extend from the center of the earth to the middle of the sky. Feel what that does to your body. Let your spine straighten a little bit. Feel what's holding you and feel what you're reaching towards. And then feel your width extend through your sides. Energetically move past the sides of your arms, past the walls of your home. Connect with everything and everyone that's here with you. Take a minute and feel into your depths, ground into your core. And feel what's in front of you. Feel what's behind you. I invite you to come into the conversation open. Maybe answer some of the questions in your head about your own life. And then just come back to sharing the space with us here. I believe that storytelling is one of the oldest and most powerful medicines that we have. I believe that the act of telling a story and the act of hearing one, receiving one, is powerful, powerful medicine. So Saifa, thank you for offering yours as you have so consistently throughout the years. You said a little bit earlier about why you do what you do, but I want to start off by asking you, why specifically use the strategy of telling your personal story?
You know, there's a disabled activist. Her name is Mia Mingus, and she has this WordPress blog called Leaving Evidence. And I think it's just so powerful because she was like, I want to leave evidence that I was here, that I existed. So that someone, somewhere can know that I existed. And that always has stayed with me, because I think for me, you know, doctors tried to erase me. Literally, you know, my days old body, they wanted to do surgery. And, you know, my mom saved me from early infant surgery, right? And because, you know, I was born with like a small phallus and undescended testes, you know, they assigned me as a girl and they wanted to create a vagina for me as an infant, you know? So literally from birth, you know, I have been fighting erasure. And I feel like the stories of Black folks, queer folks, disabled folks, migrant folks, the people living at those intersections often get erased. And so I think for me, when I tell my story, I'm telling my story, but I'm also telling the story of my Nana, my mother's mother. I'm telling the story of all the people in my family who couldn't tell their stories, who can't tell their stories, right? I'm telling the stories of all the people in my lineage who were born with the same variation, right? Who couldn't tell their stories, you know? And I tell my story for the sake of reaching someone, anyone, but especially that it may reach the ears of like a urologist who may decide to stop doing surgery, that it may reach the ears of a parent who would be like, I don't want this for my child, that it may reach the ears of someone who has been harmed, you know, by these practices, to say that like, you're perfect and there's life beyond what has happened to you.
So, Saif, who do you come from, my friend? Who and where do you come from?
I'm the child, I'm the son, I am the known, you know, I was my father's daughter, I'm my mother's son. My dad was from Brooklyn, born and raised. His father was from Mississippi. His mother was from Alabama, you know, part of the Great Migration North that Black people did, fleeing the racial terrorism of the South. You know, I am, you know, the son of Athel Wall, you know, who came from Wilmington, North Carolina, which was the site of the 1898 massacre, you know? I come from Southern folks. I come from people who are proud. I come from people who were hurting, you know, like who hurt, you know, and in turn, those people hurt others. And, you know, I come from people, I come from a legacy that was determined to live when they had no other options. And that's, you know, that's the pride that I carry, but that's also the weight that I carry too.
Where were you born?
I was born in the Bronx, in New York City. You know, South Bronx, not Riverdale, South Bronx. When I was born, the Bronx was on fire, literally. You know, you had landlords torching their buildings to collect insurance, you know. I lived through the HIV/AIDS epidemic. I lived through the crack epidemic. I'm the last of 5 children, my oldest sister who's passed on.
Who raised you?
I was raised by my mom. I was raised by my mom. And, there's something about grief that just, grief is so weird, like grief, there's no, it's not linear at all, you know? And my mom died now 4 years ago, and I still mourn her every day, you know? So, yeah, I was raised by my mom. My dad, he was there, but he was in and out. Him and my mom separated when I was 4 years old. And my mom was a hustler, because my dad, you know, and this is like the impact of trauma, right? Like, being an adult, I can say as an adult who takes care of my dog, right? I don't have kids. Who takes care of my fucking dog, right? Like I was just like, man, you fucked up. Like when him and my mom separated, he only gave my mom like $400 a month. And that was just enough to cover rent. So my mom was like out here. She was hustling. My mom was a hustler to the day she died. But the problem is my mom didn't know when to stop hustling. She didn't know how to turn that shit off because she was always fighting for her survival, you know? And so like, if I'm honest, like my dad was in my life 8 years of my life. He died when I was 14, So he was there 8 years of my life, 3 years of which he was a crackhead, So like my dad was like, he was there and he was not, So it's like, I remember when I started recovery in 2007, I started recovery for sex and love addiction, right? Because like, what's wild, right? Definitely afraid of intimacy, addicted to sex. The two go hand in hand, right? And I remember like this woman who I was recovery partners with, she was just like, your mom kind of emotionally incested you. And that shit hit me like a ton of bricks because I was just like, I was angry that she said that. I was angry. But as I settled into it, I was like, it's true. Because like when my dad left, I was like my mom's emotional support. When my mom was in her addiction, I was cleaning up vomit. Like I was totally codependent with her addiction, whether it be the alcohol, whether it be the cocaine, you know. So me and my mom's relationship, went through the fire. And I think like people use the term, because pop psychology is in, everyone's like, oh my God, parentified child. And, that shit means something to me, right? Like I don't use that term loosely because that actually means something to me. Words mean things, you know? So
you come from, we talked about kind of your older ancestral lineage. You come from folks who are survivors, but folks who have been hurt also, and then your mom and your pop. How do you make the distinction between their pain and your own pain?
Woo! Hermon! Man. I mean, their pain is my pain. Like when I was I grew up as a girl, right? Like, and so my mom was a survivor of sexual assault at least 2 times in her life that she can name, right? And I grew up with this hyper vigilance, even though I'm not a survivor of rape per se, you know, like I have this vigilance of rape that's not mine, right? That's not my story. That's her narrative that like became my story, you know? And it's just like, how do we separate ourselves from the pain of our caregivers, right? Like, how do we separate ourselves from the pain of those who came before us? You know, like people talk about intergenerational trauma, epigenetic trauma. You know, we can't separate ourselves from that, right? But, you know, I think there's something about as I'm like physically, emotionally, and spiritually, as I'm healing myself, I heal the people who came before me, right? Like when I entered recovery, like I was healing my father's pain because my dad never made it to recovery. He was addicted to alcohol, addicted to women, addicted to everything, everything. Alcohol, women, crack. That's what took him out. You know what I'm saying? And so the thing about it is that for me, like when I stepped into those rooms, I knew that I wasn't only healing my pain because as much shit as I talked about my father, about his womanizing, and then my mom talking to me about my dad's womanizing, the more that I was just like, I became like my father. You know what they say, the sins of the father, you know, like I was just like, I was moving in the same ways my father was.
How so?
You know, I was a savage. You know, I was so disconnected from my own feelings, you know, because I was traumatized, you know, like growing up in the Bronx during the crack epidemic, growing up with like my dad went to jail, he died in prison, having to like, you know, be responsible, you know, like negotiating my mom's addiction, like her paranoia, her unchecked mental health issues, you know, like it was wild, right? So a thing is, I learned how to be really competent, right? To overcompensate for my trauma. So, you know, I can articulate with the best of them. I had all the language, you know, like I was like charismatic and, you know, outgoing, all the things, but I was full of shit, right? I didn't know what love was, you know? And what's so deep is that when I had started recovery, before I started recovery, I was 29 years old. I literally lost my mind. I lost my mind. I lost my mind, right? Because, like, you know, Saturn's return was upon me, and I knew that I had to shift. I knew I had to do something different. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what was happening. All I knew that around me and inside of me, something broke open and something needed to shift. And at that point, I knew that like either I was going to kill myself or someone was going to kill me. Like that's just what it was, right? And so I sought out the my coworker who's a therapist, and I was just like, I need to see a therapist, you know, like I need therapy because I couldn't even think straight, right? And she referred me to her friend, unbeknownst to me, had 18 years of sobriety in Sex Addicts Anonymous. And, you know, our first session, he asked me, he was like, when did you realize love was not possible? And I just broke down. I started crying. Couldn't even answer, you know? And I think from then on, you know, he gave me a pamphlet. He was just like, you know, I suggest that you take this pamphlet. And I laughed in his face. I laughed in his face. I was like, oh, that's not for me, you know? And then, you know, I went to my first meeting, and then I just been on a healing journey ever since. Because I was just like, I need to recover those parts of me that were stolen, that were taken away, you know?
I was just thinking, you were talking, and I was thinking, it's funny what we find when we lose our minds sometimes. Um, I think I wanted to start off by asking about your family, because being intersex doesn't happen in a vacuum. So as folks are dealing with all of the ish that comes with being intersex, there are all of these other life contexts that are still happening.
Right.
Poverty still happens, racism still happens, mama issues, papa issues, sister,
Ooh.
like everything is happening at the same time.
Right.
And sometimes I feel like we have a tendency to isolate one thing, and we forget that a person's healing happens within like the larger scope of what their life is.
Right.
So, I just want, as you tell your intersex story, I
Right.
just want to always hold up your whole story.
Yeah.
You said something to me. It actually wasn't too long ago, a little bit before you moved to England. You said we were talking about how far back your intersex lineage goes. And you said that means that there were slaves on plantations
Right.
who were intersex.
Right.
And like that was, and what that meant, what that must have meant, not to have the information or the answers or the words or the language or whatever else, the resources.
Right.
And I don't know what information there is on intersex, experiences at that time. But that really, really struck a chord with me. And I think about when you're talking about the pain of like their pain is my pain.
Right.
Just what's written in your bones. There's some things that we are raised with, and they become etched in our bones. So I'm also holding that story, that familiar story for you. How are you feeling? How's your body? How are you feeling your body?
Yeah, let me be honest. I can feel my feet on the ground. I can feel my butt in this chair. I can feel my forearms on my thighs. There's something in my chest that's kind of warm, but also kind of hot too. But I feel present, and I feel connected.
How's your breath? Are you breathing?
Man, I be taking deep breaths. You asked a couple questions. I was like, "Ooh, I need some air," But I think I can afford to take some deeper breaths.
Yeah. Take them as you need to.
Yeah.
So, what hospital were you born in?
New York Presbyterian Hospital in New York. What's wild is that there's a doctor on staff there. Her name is Dr. Anka Earhart. She was my therapist for a year and a half. And I read this book, As Nature Made Him, by John Colapinto. And he talks about the story of David Reimer, who was an intersex, right? Who was born in Alberta, Canada, I believe, and was a twin. And the parents, after he was born, the parents, wanted him to be circumcised. And I think the tool that was used actually burned off his penis. And the parents were really distraught, and they saw like a video segment by this doctor, John Money, at Johns Hopkins Hospital. And they contacted John Money, and they brought their son to John Money, who made the suggestion that David be raised as a girl. Because John Money came up with this, John Money sort of cemented the protocols for intersex children, because he believed that sex is different from gender, which is radical, right? Because basically that has allowed space for trans people. And he would later coin the terms like gender roles and gender identity. But he experimented on intersex children. And so there was this child whose penis was burned off, who John Money was like, oh, the child should be raised as a girl.
Mm.
And so basically the parents, changed his name. And, John Money told this lie that everything was fine, everything was great. Joan, that's how she was referred to in the literature, went on to get married and adopt children and live a happy life. But the reality is that he had feminizing surgery to create a clitoris and the beginnings of a vagina. He actually rebelled and transitioned, I think, at 13 or 14. And he ended up marrying a woman and adopting her children, but he also committed suicide.
Mm.
And this is someone who was not intersex.
Mm.
So, for me, it's just so deep, right? That someone who wasn't intersex was forced to have an experience that is only uniquely experienced by intersex people. And maybe that's a stretch to say it's only experienced by intersex people, but that just lets you know the gravity of what's being done and how it impacts people. So I'm reading this book and I see Dr. Anka Earhart, who helped to shape this theory with John Money. And I was just like, there is a deep pathology among doctors, among surgeons, who continue to do these surgeries despite the protests of patients who for decades, for at least 2 decades, have said, this is not right, And so, when I think about New York Presbyterian, I think that there are perpetrators who are working there, perpetrators who are operating in the name of medicine. And it goes against everything we know and love about doctors, right? Like from a child, you're taught doctors heal people. Doctors are good, We love a doctor, But there's so many stories of the egregious things that happen in the name of medicine. We don't have to go too far, And so, I think for me, my activism is about consent. And I think it's about, for me, it's the justice piece, because it's just like, until my life is no more, I will continue to ride for this issue because they fucked with the wrong motherfucker,
Okay. So, talk to me about the circumstances surrounding your own birth, what your mom's process was, and just kind of what the early days of, you being born, what were the conversations that were had with your mom? What did that look like?
Yeah.
It's essentially your birth story.
Yeah. So, this is a shout out to, my older folks on the call. My mom, she would say that she was very fertile, and she had an IUD inside of her for 10 years, right? And you know what's so wild? So wild. That's how I know some spiritual shit be moving through my family, right? Like me and the older sister, who I'm not talking to, we're 15 years apart. I ain't talking to her. Yo, I'm not talking to her. 15 years apart, same day, right? So my mom loved to pride herself on how regular her cycle was. She was just like, I'm so regular, right? And my sister next to me in age, she was born in 68. I was born in 78. 10 years, my mom had an IUD inside of her, right? And as soon as she took it out, according to her, this is where, you know, the emotional incest comes in. According to her, my dad, whenever he wanted to make a baby, he would drink Guinness Stout and he would put an egg in it, maybe 1 or 2 eggs. He would whip it up, drink it. It sounds disgusting. But according to him, it increased the sperm count. So essentially, they did what they had to do. I was born. I was conceived. So what my mom was thinking, because of this variation in our family, I'm one of like 6 living people in my family with this variation, one of 8 total. My mom thought, like my Nana, that the more children she had, she could beat it, right? That the variation would max out. Because by this point, she already had 2 children with the same variation who were assigned girls. And so my mom thought she could beat it. So my mom was pregnant with me, and she was just like, I got a boy. You know, she would be out with her girlfriends. They'd be like, ooh, girl, the way that belly hanging, yes, you got a boy. You know, and my mom's like, yes, I got a boy. I'm cute. I got a boy. And I think my mom also had a sadness because to her, you know, she knew that if they did an amniocentesis, it might show that I have XY chromosomes. So she didn't get an amniocentesis. And so she gave birth to me. Now, it's interesting how she went into labor because my mom, according to her, she didn't have a drink while she was pregnant with me. She didn't sniff no cocaine. She loved cocaine. She didn't sniff no cocaine. She didn't have a drink. She was just like, I was clean and sober. She felt so good about that. So my aunt, who's an alcoholic, was like, come on, come on over. You know, let's have a drink. Celebrate. You're almost there, girl, you know? So my mom was 9 months by this point, right? And she had that drink and she started spotting. And she was just like, she got concerned, you know? And I don't know whether they induced labor, but she did say, she was like, you did not want to come out. So even then I knew something wasn't right about this world. I was like, keep me in. You know, I try to stay in to the last minute, you know? But I came out, I was healthy. And, you know, on my birth record, when I got my medical records at 25, you know, they had put ambiguous genitalia, and then they scratched it out, and then they put normal, right? So the erasure was already happening, right? Already moving. And so, you know, they told my mom that I was a girl. And this is what's so insidious. They wrote in my birth record, they were like, you know, the child is a girl. She has gonads, not testes. And I never forget this, and will function as such. Bastards, how dare they? You know what I'm saying? How dare they? And so they wanted to do surgery on my body immediately. They wanted to create a vagina. And my mom was like, hell no. And she took me home, right? And the Department of Pediatric Endocrinology called her for 2 weeks, harassing her. Like, oh, you have to do this, you have to do this. My mom said no. And then knowing my mom, she probably cursed him out because she was like, what you're not going to do is fucking call me and harass me. So my mom probably cursed him out, which is probably why they stopped calling. So love that for her.
Mom said no to
Huh?
You know why your mom was so staunch about the no to the surgery?
You know, by then she already had 2 children. And my mom, she wanted to be a nurse. So she had done so much reading, right? And I think at that time, you know, there was a sort of emerging ideology that you should just let the testes or the gonads stay inside through puberty, right? And because I had partial androgen sensitivity syndrome, which masculinized my genitals, you know, she was just like, you know, yeah, I'm not gonna do surgery. Because with my sisters, they removed their testes in infancy. But my mom was like, oh, no, 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 no. I'm not going to do that.
Can you break down for the folks what intersex is? So moving forward in this conversation, there's just kind of an understanding of what we're talking about when we say intersex.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Hermon. Intersex is a set of sex characteristics. So gonadal, hormonal, chromosomal, genitals that are atypical for male and female. So most often, the people who have atypical genitals, like me, those are the ones who are often subject to harm. But the reality is that we don't know who's intersex. So anybody on this call, until you tell me what them hormones doing, them chromosomes are doing, I'm not sure anyone on this call is not intersex, right? But the people who are visibly intersex are the ones who are often subject to the most harm.
Okay. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
That's helpful to folks. All right. So your mom is like surgery, no, no, no.
Yeah.
You know, baby you is taken home.
Yeah.
What are, because I believe you had surgery when you were 13 or 14, right? So what are the years up to that point? And more specifically, what is your first memory of introduction to your own sex and gender? What was that conversation?
Ooh, I hope people thinking about this too, because that's a deep question. Yeah, you know, I think being a kid, like I was really embodied as a child, right? Like I was embodied, like I was in my body. And I was a queer kid. You know, I would run around with my shirt off. I would be like, yeah, you know, because I thought I was a boy out here. I was like, oh, I'm a boy out in these streets. You know, you can't tell me nothing, you know. And I remember that, you know, when my sister, one of my older sisters, she had this friend, Tanya. Tanya was fine. Tanya was fine. Fine, fine, fine. And this may be outside the sex and gender thing, but this is the queer thing. She was fine. Oh, she was so fine. And I remember being like 5 years old, just totally enamored with her, right? And so she was visiting for Christmas. And I must have been like 5 or 6, between 4 and 6 years old. So you know, my parents, I think probably my parents, my sister, her friend, Tanya, fine ass Tanya, was, you know, they were having dinner and I marched into the kitchen. And I remember I had on my, you know, because I wanted to look good, right? You know, I dress like a bum now, but I wanted to look good then, right? So I put on my little sweater, my little corduroy pants. I think I had my Scooby-Doo slippers. And I was like, I'm going to marry her, you know? And they probably just shut down the whole conversation. You know, they were like, what? And I remember, I have that memory, right? I have that memory. And I remember when I was older, I had a conversation with my mom and I was like, do you remember that? You know, and she started laughing and she was like, yeah, I remember that. I was like, oh, okay. So I'm not the only one who remembers that. And I was like, what did you tell me? You know? And she was like, I told you that you were a girl and girls can't marry girls. And I was like, oh, that's funny. you know? Um, so I mean, for me, it's just like, yeah, you know, when I was growing up, like my body was changing in ways that I didn't understand, but that I accepted, right? Like with intersex variations, we don't know how they show up in bodies. They show up all kinds of ways, right? Um, and so I think for me, like, my gender always leaned toward the more masculine side, and I think for me, I was also a really, you know, adaptable child. So I also, my mom told me I was a girl, act like a girl, although I rebelled. I was like, I don't want to wear these damn dresses. And my mom wouldn't make me wear dresses except to see my dad's mom, right? And so she was like, you want to look pretty because it wasn't about me, right? My mom had the front for my grandmother. So make it look like I don't need your raggedy ass son, right? So of course, my gender presentation has to suffer the consequences. So I gotta wear a damn dress. But yeah, I mean, I was okay with what my body was doing. And I think when I was castrated, like my body changed in ways that I didn't understand and I didn't like. So I remember I gave testimony in 2004 at the San Francisco Human Rights Commission. They had a hearing on intersex. And, you know, there was this activist from New Zealand, and they came to because this was the public comment section, and they came to the mic and they said, I don't have gender dysphoria, I have body dysphoria based on what happened to me. And when I was castrated, you know, they wanted to change my body. So, they gave me estrogen and progesterone. And when I was in college, the doctor that I saw was like, I don't know why they gave you progesterone because you don't have a uterus, right? And, for me, it's just so diabolical, right? They wanted to erase all sort of indications of any masculinity, right? So I remember like my facial hair was starting to come in. I remember like I had a lot of body hair, like my voice had dropped, like I was going through these physical changes, again, that I didn't understand, but that I was comfortable with, right? And I remember after surgery, once they started me on estrogen, like all the body hair fell out. Then I developed cellulite in my thighs. And then my face got really soft and round. And parts of my body were just foreign to me. Right. So, I became this really beautiful, soft, supple, girl, young woman. But I was just like, that wasn't what I wanted. And I think even in taking testosterone, it doesn't do the same thing for me that my testes would have done. And so last year, I went to see a geneticist. And, I went to see him. I wanted to make that appointment because, I had talked to, one of my comrades who's also intersex, and they went to a geneticist. So I was like, I want to know what my variation is about. And when the results came back, he told me that about how this particular variation was inherited through my mother's mother, grandmothers, aunts, uncles, who existed years, decades, centuries before me. And it blew my fucking mind to think that there could have been people who were enslaved. who were intersex, who had the same variation. To think that there were people who were in the hulls of ships, who were tortured in the transatlantic passage, who were probably thrown overboard because their bodies were so different, right? It makes me think back to my African ancestors who lived with this variation among them. It's mind blowing, right? And so he told me, he was just like, you know, he's like, you have normal androgen receptors. He's like, you just don't have a lot of them. And this whole time, I'm 42 years old, for 42 years, I thought that I had abnormal or mutated receptors. That's what it says in the medical literature. But in actuality, I have normal receptors. I just don't have a lot of them. So he said, like, if a regular male has 50 million receptors, you have 10,000. And that shit just freed me, because I was just like, even though wasn't the answer I was looking for. Well, no. I mean, I think it was the answer I was looking for. I think it made sense, but it couldn't atone for what happened to me as a young person. Because what he also shared is that at puberty, your bodies are flooded with hormones during that one moment in your life. You can never get that moment back, you know? And I was just like, oh, this is diabolical. This diabolical. And that just lit a fire under my ass to really go hard against this establishment that really continues to harm people.
I want to take a minute and let that really settle. Both in your body, but also in the bodies of everyone listening to the story of your experience. Like I'm listening to you, and every time, because I know your story, but every time I hear it, it's just like I need a minute to let that really, really settle. Yeah, so a few breaths in and out, and then where are you at in your body?
You know, I feel my feet are sweating. I stink. My pits are raging. You know, my feet are sweaty. I can still feel my butt in the chair, my feet on the ground. You know, I just want to take a minute and really just say thank you for just really just walking with me through this, you know?
It's not.
Yeah.
I think what I'm feeling is grief. There's a deep, deep, deep sense of grief. And yeah, I just wanted to give like just a breath of silence to that. So settle into it, love. And I'm watching you tell the story, and you're a dynamic storyteller, so there's a lot of physical movement in the way you tell stories. And then you settle, and then the emotion settles. And I feel you so profoundly. And I just want to take a minute and remind you that you are life, you are courage, you are possible, you are beautiful, you're healing your ancestral line. You're saving lives.
Trying to.
And inside of it all, I pray, 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 pray that it's saving your own life, that it's healing your heart
Ooh.
and your body. I want to take a minute and acknowledge the violation, the violence, the senseless act of violence against your body, against your heart, against your mind, against your spirit. That happened. That happens all of the time. And you telling your story hopefully makes it happen less. And at some point, not at all.
Oh. Ooh. Yeah.
So you're a teenager. They do surgery on you where they remove your testes. They castrate you. And they put you on hormones. And your body's now shifting in all of these ways that are unfamiliar. You said earlier on that you were, before that you were in your body.
Right.
What did that mean for you? When you said that you were in your body, what did that mean?
Yeah. I mean, I felt things, you know? There's something about trauma that really disconnects us from that animal part of us that is so permeable, that is so tender. And I think when we grow up in environments like I did, right? It was dysfunctional. Like, my dad would rage, he would break shit. Him and my mom would fight, you know what I'm saying? Because my mom didn't take shit, so they fighting. My sister was suicidal. She had severe mental health issues. Like, I grew up in insanity. Like, it was very dysfunctional because people couldn't get the help that they needed. And I'm very critical about how medicine pathologizes, Black folks, poor folks. You know what I'm saying? Like how you have Black boys who will be readily diagnosed with ADHD, right? Like these structures were not meant for us to survive, period, right? And my parents were doing the best they fucking could with the resources that they had, because they had inherited very limited resources, right? So they were acting out. And so I think for me, bring me back, Hermon. What was your question again? Because I was going somewhere.
I was asking what it meant for you when you said that you were in your body,
right,
before the castration, before and so on. You said
I felt things. I felt the trauma at home. Like I felt the violence around me. Like I felt that. When my parents separated, I cried for my father. I was so emotional as a child. And when I sought therapy when I was older, like I told the therapist, I want my tears back because I had been so shut down, right? because that's what I needed to do to survive in that environment. That was not okay. You know what I'm saying? And so for me, I felt things. And I felt my body. Like my testicles literally, I could feel them. They like sat in my groin area. Like I could feel them. They would move because testes are meant to live in the scrotum, right? So they would move up and down. I felt them. I felt that, you know? Um, and I think there's something about this compounding trauma, you know, where I'm like in this dysfunctional ass home, and then I'm experiencing this medical violence, and then there's like the violence of the state. It's like layers and layers of violence, which for me, it makes me wonder. I think Black people are a testament to like surviving the state. You know what I'm saying? Because growing up how I grew up, I know, especially given the Reaganomics and given like the crack epidemic, the AIDS epidemic, I wasn't meant to survive. Neither were my family members. And our living through that is a testament to something, woo, bigger than me, you know?
So, Saif, your mother initially said hell no to the surgery, right?
Right.
And so, as a teenager, what was the conversation that happens with the doctors
Mm.
where that switched?
I mean, they lied. They lied to her. You know, when I had came back, so when my dad went to jail, he went to prison. Let's be honest. He went to prison. My mom was going back and forth with him because he was at Rikers for a year and a half. Rikers, terrible. Prisons are terrible. They're meant to eat Black people alive. People of color, meant to eat poor folks alive. Prisons weren't built for white rich people. They were built for poor Black and brown people, period. You know what I'm saying? So my dad was at Rikers for a year and a half. My mom was going back and forth to court. My mom couldn't take care of me. Two of my sisters, ironically, the ones I'm not talking to, you know, one of my sisters lived in North Carolina, and, you know, she's so super Christian. Jesus Christ. She is such a Christian. And so she was like, she had a vision. Maybe she did. Love that. She had a vision to come get me from New York. So she came and she got me. She brought me back down to Wilmington. And so that's when my body started going through puberty. Like I look at those pictures then, and I was like, literally, I look like a boy in drag. I look like a boy in drag. You know what I'm saying? Like this gender performance was astounding, right? And then it was discovered there because I had a urinary tract infection, and the doctor couldn't find a vagina. And so my sister called my mother, and she was like, Suzanne has the same thing that we have. And then my mom was like, okay, well, you know, Suzanne needs to come back up to New York. So, you know, I was in North Carolina, totally going through puberty, going through a male puberty. And I come back to New York, and my mom, because testes are meant to live in the scrotum, I had a lot of pain, you know? And it wasn't because my testes were cancerous, it's because testes are meant to live in the scrotum. So my mom takes me to the doctor, to the pediatric, the endocrinologist, and he's furious. He's furious because he was like, this surgery was supposed to be done years ago. And so he tells my mom, it's like, those gonads are cancerous. So, I mean, unbeknownst to me, my mom had a deathly fear of cancer because her dad died from cancer. Her grandmother died from cancer. So the doctor said cancer, and she's terrified. And so she consented to surgery. So they didn't tell her that my gonads were actually testes. They didn't tell her that I would be dependent on hormones for the rest of my life. They didn't tell her that if I didn't take hormones as a young person, that I would develop osteoporosis. They didn't tell her the reason why they were doing this surgery was because they believed that girls should be girls and boys should be boys. And because I was assigned female, that I should be a woman. They didn't tell her that. They lied to her. So my healthy testes were removed. And that was probably some of the worst pain that I felt in my life. You know? And I think as an older person, you know, as a leader in the intersex movement, like I think about how that castration is so racial. You know, how Black men, Black boys were castrated when they were lynched, you know, and how these medical practitioners thought nothing to castrate my young Black body, you know. So yeah.
Years later, you sat down with the doctor who performed the surgery. Can you speak on that a bit?
Ooh. Yo. I think there's something that exists. There's a hubris that exists in medicine. Doctors are in really high esteem. What's interesting, as I do more research on the medical profession, ironically, people didn't trust doctors. When there was a movement from midwives to sort of when the field of gynecology developed, people, especially in France, did not trust doctors. They thought they were quacks. They thought they were strange. They were like, why would, especially women, they were like, why would I go to a male doctor for them to see my body? Mm-hmm. Midwives carried birth. They brought children into the world. And basically, as the power of doctors grew, they actually limited and criminalized midwives so that they can own birth, right? Can you remind me of the question? Because I was going off.
I was asking you about when you sat down with the doctor who performed surgery.
Right. There is a hubris that exists in medicine. And I always find it so odd, so strange that cisgender, straight white men have control over the bodies of women, have control over the bodies of Black people, of disabled people. It is mind-boggling. And there's so much arrogance and there's a lack of accountability. You know, they're not accountable, right? So they operate with impunity. And I was sitting on the board of this organization called Interact. And this producer from ABC wanted to do a segment. She's, bless her heart. She wanted to do a segment on an intersex patient who confronts their doctor. And I was just like, listen, I ain't trying to go up in there. I'm not trying to do no dramatic shit. So if you want that kind of story, you can count me out, right? But I want to look that motherfucker in the face and tell him my truth. You know what I'm saying? So, you know, this whole thing is being filmed. They contact the surgeon, the pediatric urological surgeon. His name is Terry Hensel. What's ironic is that given the number of people he has harmed, he is chair emeritus of urology at Columbia Presbyterian Hospital. Wow. You know, how we congratulate perpetrators, you know? And so basically, I'm offered this opportunity to confront him on camera. So, before the interview, he's like, oh, yes, I would love to. I would love to meet any of my patients, la, 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 right? And so when I came up into his office, he was unnerved because he thought that I was going to come up in there, and I played a respectable part, right? I came up suit and tie. I was ready. I was ready for war. He thought I was going to come up in there loud, curse his ass out, which he needed to get cursed out. But I was calm. I was centered, and I kept centering. Because I knew that if I didn't center, I would slap the shit out of him. I felt it. Like I literally was like, ooh, I could feel it. My hands. I was like, ooh, them hands, right? He was so arrogant, so dismissive, and he was just like, if I could do it all over again, he was like, I would assign you as a boy and I would do surgery because boys are boys and girls are girls. I'm like, you're not getting it, man. Like, it's not about the surgery. No one needs your surgery. Keep that. Keep your surgery, And I looked him in his face and I was just like, can you imagine? And I should have gave multiple trigger warnings, but I'm gonna give one now. I was like, can you imagine how horrific it was for you as a grown ass man to tell a 14-year-old girl that you're gonna shave down her clitoris and that you're gonna create a cavity inside of her? And for him to hear his own words unnerved him. He couldn't say anything. He was speechless, right? And we had a lot of tense moments in that conversation. And frankly, I didn't give a shit. And, afterwards, the anchor, Juju Chang, who, was with me during all this, she asked me, I forgot her question, but I think my response was, he has to cut himself off from feeling to continue to do this, to look me in my face and still commit to these surgeries. There's a level of brutality and dehumanization that takes part on the people who are oppressed. Freire, Hermon, I know you love Freire, right? But it's a dehumanization on the part of the oppressor. And I know the urologists who commit to doing these surgeries, despite the protests of people, I know that on some level, they're not able to access their humanity, because if someone is telling me, another trigger warning, if someone is telling me to stop, to say that what you did harmed me, it should arrest my behavior, I would not keep going. You know what I'm saying? And so I really question the humanity of these men and women who continue to do these surgeries on children, despite the multiple protests around the world for these surgeries to end.
I want to recognize that disembodiment breeds disembodiment. And the level of disembodiment it takes to become a perpetrator, which is what you are when someone has told you that you're causing harm and you refuse to stop, I think is just like such a perfect example of what we're all talking about healing. Ultimately, it's pathological. The violence is just pathological. The capacity to commit it is pathological. Yeah, I'm just gonna say, take a minute again, few breaths, Yo, thank you so much for having the courage to own your story, to stand in your story, to share your story as medicine. Yo, I love you beyond. You are the fiercest human being, the fiercest spirit, the fiercest healer, the fiercest keeper of human rights. Yo, ground in that, because you are, yo, you change my heart and my spirit every day that I know you. Your story is touching, and your story is healing, and your story is moving. And I really encourage us not to just to listen to this story and then just keep it. Have conversations, folks. Have conversations. Talk to your people. Have your people talk to their people. If you are a healthcare practitioner, like make sure that every PA or nurse or medical assistant you work with knows what we are talking about. The more people are informed and the more people are educated, the more of a chance we have to do something different. So let this story not just end here. Let it not be this thing that we sat through this morning, you know, and listen to. Let it be a catalyst for education and information and transformation. Yeah, because that's how we get stuff done. And tell your stories. Like let Cypher be an example. Tell your story. Everybody has a story, and everybody's story is medicine. So tell your story. Saif, I'm mindful of time. It's 9:18. Cypher calls me the drill sergeant because I'm time. And there is, you know, we could spend days, really days, talking about this, but there are a few questions that I definitely want to ask before we close up. But I do want to, because we spoke a lot about the earlier part of your life. Right. Talk to me about the reclamation of self and what that journey and process was like.
Man, how many hours? How many hours? You know, I did a IG live with Erica Hart, who was a breast cancer survivor. And in that, I said, we have a mandate to heal. We heal for ourselves, we heal for our ancestors, but we're mandated to do that. I think for me, reclaiming my body means taking hormones that feel good to me, right? Like I have, although the testosterone doesn't do the same for me as my testes would have, it feels good to take hormones that feel good to me. For me, it has meant, you know, I have 2 scars on my belly where they took my testes. So actually reclaiming is actually me having top surgery to remove the breast that I didn't want, right? For me, reclamation is reclaiming my sexuality. Not the one that they prescribed that they wanted for me, which was heterosexual, right? Because they do these surgeries, these genital surgeries on boys, girls, but they do them on girls because the script is so that you can have heterosexual intercourse with your husband. This is in the books, people. I'm not making this up. I wish I was, right? So for me, it's reclaiming my sexuality, reclaiming my queerness, right? Now I'm queer as fuck. And now I don't give a fuck how people read me. People read me as male, people read me as female, people don't know what the fuck I am. And I don't give a shit because I know who I am. And I'm not gonna let people's hangups around gender affect me. And that's the reason why I say that is because at one time, especially after I started transitioning, if people misgendered me, it would hurt me so deeply, right? So I say to everyone on this call, if you have someone in your life who's trans and you're not respecting their pronouns, fucking get with it, right? Because we need to create safe spaces for gender nonconforming, non-binary people to exist. And so my whole thing is like, I realized after a certain point that people's hangups around gender have nothing to do with me. It's not about me. And when I make it about me, I'm hurting myself, you know? And I think for me, like, it's a radical reclaiming of like my body, right? Fuck who I want to fuck, love who I want to love, and not be bound by what people think I should be doing. Like, I'm out here. You know what I'm saying? If I choose to be a hoe, I'm a hoe, right? Like, I'm not going to, I want to be free and embodied, however that looks, right? And I think I want to do for me what the freedom fighters did for our people, which is like, we always got to fight for freedom. And freedom is on multiple levels. You know what I'm saying? So there it is.
Thank you, Boo. I want people to leave with something practical also. So for folks who are thinking about having kids, and so on and so forth, what language are they to look out for in terms of the stuff doctors say to convince people to have surgeries? Like what should they be mindful of?
You know, I'm not a parent. I'm a dog parent, but I'm not a parent to human children. So from the experiences that I've shared, and this is a great way to end off, you know, from what I've heard from parents, it's terrifying. It's a terrifying time, right? I mean, even the process of birth is violent, right? And it's scary. Even for the people who have all the degrees, all the emotional range, blah, blah, blah. I love my child no matter what. There's something very animal and innate about having a child. That all that shit goes out the window. You just want your child to be healthy and safe. And doctors create this emergency, right? And they'll use language like, oh, your child has this abnormality. Your child is not normal. We don't know your child's gender. We have to do the surgery, so forth and so on. And so for parents who are terrified because now that they've learned that their child is abnormal and was born intersex, they're scared. And they may not have had contact with an intersex person or parents of intersex people. So they're literally terrified. And so what I would say is that I would ask people, we're out here. There are people creating content who are intersex, who are intersex, right? Telling their stories, young people, right? Increasingly, who are saying like, don't do this, right? And everybody got Google, you know what I'm saying? Like a quick Google search to give you everything you need to know, right? And just wait, just delay. Like I get messages, emails from parents, some parents who like, I consented to the surgery, others being like, I stopped them because doctors will lie to you because doctors are human. They're biased. They have prejudice. They can be racist, transphobic, homophobic. Doctors are not angels, right? So, and I ground that in this experience. I'm living in Manchester, England. Love Manchester. Wish there was more sun, but hey, it's England. And before I moved to Manchester, I was living in Atlanta, ATL, Georgia. And the reason why I moved there is that I wanted to see Black people all the time. I was like, I want to see Black people everywhere I go, right? And a mother contacted me. She was Latinx, Afro Latinx. Her man is Black. She's 30, he's 25. She contacted me. She contacted me. And she had this baby who was so adorable, just adorable, right? And she was just like, I've never heard of this thing before. And I was expecting a boy, and the doctor told me that this was a girl. And, I was distraught. She said she literally cried for 3 months. And she was depressed because her baby was told she was told her baby was not normal. And then she was just like, she heard the terms that they were using, and she started to do some internet searching. Then she came across my story. Then she came across other stories. And she had heard these stories, these horrific stories from intersex people themselves who had said, I was harmed. And I still live with the effects of that harm. Lack of sensation in the genitals, scarring, PTSD, And she was just like, I don't know how my baby will turn out, but I'm not going to do the surgery. And I went over to her house, and I think it was at a time when I felt really burnt out around this activism. Like I was tired, going back to this emotional toll that we were talking about. I was tired. And I held this child, and I was just like, oh, this is why I do this work. This is why I keep coming back to it. To like hold this child who hasn't been harmed yet, right? Who has 2 young, loving parents, right? Totally defying all the stereotypes, right? Of like, young Black people don't know what they're talking about, da, 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 da. These people don't have advanced degrees. These are young, Black, working class people living in fucking Georgia who made a conscious decision not to do surgery on their child. This child is loved. And I think that lit a fire in me. It's almost like, even though this was dramatized, of course, but it reminds me of like the movie Schindler's List, right? And of course, he doesn't get a kudos for doing the right thing, right? But at the end of the movie, Schindler's like, I could have saved one more person, And for me, if my story helps to save one more child, then I know that my work, that the medicine is moving,
So it's 9:29. If I can get like just 2 more minutes, I just want to really, I want you to really quickly mention Chicago and Lori, because that was not, a small victory. That's something that was worked really hard for. And I want to recognize, I want you to talk about what you're doing in England also, like
Right.
the actual work that you're doing there. And yeah, that's it. And I want to thank everybody I'm asking the questions, but I really feel the energy of everybody holding the space and holding the container for this story. And I'm so, so, so grateful for how gracefully and graciously folks have showed up in this space. And of course, to you for just being everything, everything, everything good in the world. You are.
Yo, I just want to say, thank you to you before I close out. I want to say thank you to you for just you holding me. Because I am, because we are, like I couldn't, you saved my life so many times, just through your words, through your loving of me, you know? And I know, I don't believe in this capitalist idea that people are great because they're great, right? Like I'm lucky, and I'm especially lucky because of the people who choose to love me and be in community with me. And that's what you have offered me time and time again.
Mutual, my love, so mutual.
Um, in 2016, I co-founded the Intersex Justice Project because I believed that if we could get one hospital to stop doing surgeries, that it would create almost like a domino effect, right? And you know, change doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? As Hermon said earlier, it's like all these moving pieces. It's all these people, all these stories, all these bodies, all this money, all this everything that creates movement. So me and my comrades founded the Intersex Justice Project because we wanted to center intersex people of color pushing back against the medical establishment. And we chose Lurie Children's Hospital in Chicago because my comrade, Pigeon, was harmed there, was mutilated there. And because Pigeon had been doing that work in Chicago for so long, being in social justice community, we had the support to do that. So we were supported by Black folks, queer folks, trans folks, and we staged protests in front of Lurie Children's Hospital to demand them to stop doing these surgeries. And because hospitals are not accountable to patients, but rather stakeholders, they ignored our protests, right? Because we got to remember, hospitals are corporations, you know what I'm saying? And they always think about their bottom line more than anything else. And so we protested. And there were times I wanted to walk away, many times. And we both continued. And then one day, something just happened, right? That our protests made it to such a level where the state got involved, and the state threatened their funding. And because of that, they issued an apology to intersex people who've been harmed at their hospital. But they also said that they would stop doing surgeries for 6 months, right? Now, I don't trust corporations, right? Because corporations gonna do what they do. But for me, it's just like, just the act of stopping these surgeries for 6 months is a victory.
Woo!
You know, especially from a very well-funded, a very powerful hospital that exists in the Midwest who wasn't accountable to anyone, you know? And I think it shows the power of community. I think it shows the power of faith, ancestors. And so I think for me, it's just like right now, you know, the co-founder, the two of the co-founders walked away to do other things, as they should, because motherfuckers need a break. So I'm in England doing a research fellowship about intersex erasure from social policy in England and in the Republic of Ireland. So I'm like literally in the belly of the beast, reading these very fascinating but very problematic texts from doctors referring to my body and my people as abnormal and dysfunctional, misfits, freaks. It's terrible. But this is my part of my service to my folks, but also to the movement.